Hi, and welcome back to my channel, Pathways to God and Significance. And if you've been following the channel along, you will know that what I do here is I try to present some of the messages that I would give at my church on Sunday mornings, and that's Bethany Baptist Church in Kentville, Nova Scotia. If you get out this way, come and visit. So this message is based on Mark chapter 11, and I'm calling it Restoring God's House of Prayer. Well, during my time with this church, I've noticed that the nations have been represented. Believers from Mexico joined us for several months during this past year. A Mi'kmaq indigenous gentleman also did. In our pews, we regularly see descendants of people from Ireland, England, Scotland, and the Netherlands. And last Sunday, one of our members from the African Nova Scotian community reminded us of her journey. And we continue to appreciate the work of God among black households in town and throughout the province. And at least one family from the Philippines has been with us these past couple of years. We see a missionary family named the Bustons, who we support their work in Rwanda. And we continue to support refugee families who have made their way into the Annapolis Valley. And we celebrate missions in Eastern Europe and our work among the indigenous communities of our own region. So, my church, Bethany Baptist Church, you might call it a house of prayer for the nations. Now this morning, I want to recall Jesus' return to Jerusalem. And he entered the temple city, he approached the temple, and as we will see, he was angry with the leadership of the temple that they had allowed the temple to become a great market instead of ensuring that it would remain a house of prayer for the nations. But I'm getting ahead of the story a little bit, so let's start with Jesus entering Jerusalem. So here's the reading. As they approached Jerusalem and came to Bethphage and Bethany at the Mount of Olives, Jesus sent two of his disciples, saying to them, "Go to the village ahead of you, and just as you enter it, you'll find a colt there, which no one has ever ridden. Untie it, bring it here, and if anyone asks you, 'Why are you doing this?' say, 'The Lord needs it, and we'll send it back here shortly.'" Which probably means that Jesus knew the owner, and some of this had been arranged already. Anyway, continuing on with the reading, they went and found a colt outside in the street, tied at a doorway. As they untied it, some people standing there did ask, "What are you doing untying that colt?" And they answered as Jesus had told them, and the people let them go. When they brought the colt to Jesus and threw their cloaks on it, he sat on it. Now many people spread their cloaks on the road, while others spread branches they had cut in the fields. Those who went ahead and those who followed shouted, "Hosanna! Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Blessed is the coming kingdom of our father David. Hosanna in the highest heaven." So Jesus entered Jerusalem in that way and went into the temple courts. He looked around at everything, but since it was already late, he went out to Bethany with the 12. Now, the other day I watched a video of the swearing in of Canada's Prime Minister and his cabinet. It was in the right location, Rideau Hall in Ottawa, in this... The other day I watched a video of the swearing in of the Prime Minister of Canada and his cabinet. It was in the right location, Rideau Hall in Ottawa. In the speeches, there were memories of Canada's past, and there were hopes for the future. There was special symbols in place, a large portrait of Queen Elizabeth, our queen at that time, and the Canadian flag. A large crowd also on hand to wish the new government well. So, location, symbols, memories, hopes, and a crowd. Now, that's something like what happened as Jesus entered Jerusalem for the last time. He isn't entering just any city. He's paying attention to the location. Jerusalem, the center of the history and faith of the Jewish people, the Israelites. And then also, Jesus arranges for the right symbol. And the symbol he puts out there is the donkey on which he rode. Now, in the Old Testament book of Zechariah, we read these words, "Rejoice greatly, daughter Zion. Shout, daughter Jerusalem, see, your king comes to you, righteous and victorious, lowly, and riding on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a donkey." Jesus is 100% bringing to life before all the people this symbol that we find in Zechariah. Jesus no doubt knew the passage and deliberately arranged for the picture that Zechariah had drawn to come to life in real time, 3D, right before the eyes of the crowd. The Lord's ruler, Jesus, coming to Jerusalem to take his throne and lead the people. Jesus did not come riding on a horse like some bloodthirsty Middle Eastern emperor who were known to do these kinds of things, who had just defeated his or her enemies. Jesus came to lead, but not like so many leaders who lorded it over the people. He came to lead with a firm and compassionate hand, a king, yes, truly, but one who has humility, the right symbol, the donkey on which Jesus rode. So location, symbol, memories. Jesus' entry into Jerusalem brought back memories. The people shouted, "Hosanna! Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord." These words were already about 1,000 years old. And just as a reference, 1,000 years is roughly 4 times the age of the United States. So Jesus enters Jerusalem. These words are remembered by the people. The words are a memory of Psalm 118. That psalm is about the arrival of the ruler of the people. In the psalm, the leader of God's people arrives, victorious over his enemies, the bringer of blessing. But these words also brought to mind more than the memory of Psalm 118. The people also brought back the memory of King David. As I've sometimes said, the people of that time, Jesus' time, remembered the reign of King David as a kind of golden age for the nation of Israel, an age of peace, freedom, prosperity, a memory, again, that's about 1,000 years old at that time. Blessed is the coming kingdom of our father David. So as Jesus enters Jerusalem, the people remember the ancient words of Psalm 118, and they recall the glory days of someone they term Father David. So clearly they're investing Jesus with all this kind of stature and hopes. Now, also then, hope for the future. The people in Jerusalem hoped that Jesus would be the kind of king like a David, bringing back in some way those golden decades of freedom for the nation, the Jewish people living and worshiping freely as the people of the living God. After so many decades of living under the thumb of the Roman Empire, how the people longed for a new day when they could worship and live freely. So from our reading so far, we see that Jesus arrives in order to accept the praises of the people, to have them celebrate his glory and his greatness. The praises that the people shouted were completely fitting for Jesus. After all, he is the Lord. But Jesus also came to do something else. And that something else is this. He'd come to announce the condemnation of the Jerusalem temple. I'm reading on now. The next day, as they were leaving Bethany, Jesus was hungry, and seeing in the distance a fig tree in leaf, he went to find out if it had any fruit. When he reached it, he found nothing but leaves, because it was not the season for figs. And then he said to the tree, "May no one ever eat fruit from you ever again." And his disciples heard him say it. So there's a fig tree, no figs on it, plenty of leaves, showy, but no food. And Jesus uses this fig tree as an illustration of the temple. When he says, "May no one ever eat fruit from you again," he is announcing the fate of the temple. Like the fig tree, the temple showed well, lots of curb appeal. But like the fig tree, the temple could not nourish anyone. And in talking the way he did to the fig tree with the disciples hearing, Jesus was really speaking about the temple. Like the tree, the temple has no further use. The day was coming, and would come very quickly, when no one would ever eat from it again. What Jesus said to the fig tree, announcing the condemnation of the temple, that sets us up for what happens next, because here we find Jesus attacking the temple. On reaching Jerusalem, Jesus entered the temple courts and began driving out those who were buying and selling there. He overturned the tables of the money changers and the benches of those selling doves, and would not allow anyone to carry merchandise through the temple courts. And as he taught them, he said, "Is it not written, 'My house will be called the house of prayer for all nations,' but you've made it a den of robbers." The chief priests and the teachers of the law heard this and began looking for a way to kill him, for they feared him, because the whole crowd was amazed at his teaching. Now, during his 3 years of public ministry, Jesus offended many of the traditional Jewish leaders of the law. He drew so many followers to himself that those traditional leaders were losing their influence over the people. We see this reflected in our text. The leaders feared the crowds, feared the people. Also, Jesus seemed to do things that only God could do. He accepted the worship of people. He announced the forgiveness of sins. And the leaders took offense then that Jewish was so influential, and they were deeply put out by the fact that he did what only God was supposed to do. There's a word for that: blasphemy. When Jesus came into Jerusalem, like the glorious king of his people, that was the second last straw as far as these Jewish leaders were concerned. The last straw came the next day. Jesus enters the temple courtyards. He disrupts the proceedings of the temple, interrupting the sale of sacrificial animals that would be sacrificed. Doves are mentioned, animals that would be sacrificed during the Passover celebrations about to take place. These last straws, as if they were not offensive enough, Jesus flings words of condemnation at the Jewish leadership which had created this animal market. Is it not written, "My house, the house of God, will be called the house of prayer for all nations, but you've made it a den of robbers"? The Jewish authorities heard this, and I believe this hardened more completely their already hard hearts. The Gospels reveal that they had been wanting to get Jesus out of the way for quite some time already, and now they had had enough. Once again, they began to look actively for a way to kill him. The crowds loved Jesus, but powerful authorities would ensure that Jesus would not survive the week. Some people say, that Jesus was killed because he loved people, and that the traditional authorities did not like that. No. He was killed because he challenged and attacked the temple authorities and the temple itself. Now, a couple of weeks ago, here at Bethany, Pastor Brian reminded us that Jesus came to put an end to the Jerusalem temple, and at the same time that he'd come to create a new temple. You and I are the living stones out of which Jesus is building this new temple. This new temple made of living stones, you and me, and millions of other believers, is where the Spirit of God himself lives. And now Jesus reminds us of one more thing. The temple of God is not only a living temple in which the Spirit of God lives, but it also is meant to be a house of prayer for the nations. The leaders of the Jerusalem temple in Jesus' day had failed to make it that. But you and I, the new temple of God, are meant to be the place where people of all nations can pray. People of all cultures and locations are supposed to find in us a safe place where they can know God and bring their prayers to him. The people of God are the living temple of God today, and this living temple is where people, all nations, must bring their problems, asking for God to lead them and to heal them. We who follow Jesus Christ, the living temple of God, where the nations are meant to gather and ask for God's help. Now, is that what the nations of the world are doing? Are they bringing their problems to God's people, and praying with them and asking for help? Well, you might say, no, they're not. And there'd be a lot of truth to that. They bring their problems to the United Nations, or they bring their problems to the government and courts of Canada and the province where I live, Nova Scotia, and they bring their problems to the courts of whatever country or region you live in. They follow, people may follow this or that strong man in Nigeria, or this ISIS leader in Syria. People may claim that if only we had more democracy, all our problems would diminish. People look for salvation in protest movements, social change, revolutions, and a newish word in the cultural scene, disruption. People seek new life from this religion or that one. People believe they can achieve a good future through war, diplomacy, education, terrorism, science, or government. You may have heard about something called an ESG score. E for environment, the S stands for social justice, and G stands for government. Governments, social justice, societies, environmental concerns, organizations or governments which score well with respect to those three things have a high ESG score, and if they score well, they are worthy of your support. And if they don't score well, they are not. But friends, the secret to a good future for people everywhere is not really in those things. The secret to a good future is for people to bring our difficulties to the living God, to pray for his guidance and help. God calls the nations to prayer. You and I have the privilege, if you're following Jesus, I don't want to assume that just because you're listening to this you are, but I hope that if you're not, you're thinking about it. We have the privilege of making this secret known. Now, it's not really a secret because the Christian faith is totally public. We don't have secret societies and secret meetings and this kind of thing. But I'm just using it as a figure of speech. The secret to a good future for the world is that people should gather with us and pray for God's mercy and blessing. In this life, the only true hope for the world is prayers, is God, and prayers to him, prayers in the name of Jesus. I'm not saying that people should not organize or educate or have flesh and blood leaders. And neither am I saying that prayer alone defeats all problems. But what I am saying is that prayer to the living God is the supreme importance for all nations and for people of all nations, because in prayer we ask for the blessing of the living God. So, wherever you may be, if you're part of a church, keep welcoming people of all nations right where you are. We are the living temple of God, and by God's grace, he will allow our homes and our churches to be communities of prayer for people of every nation who God places on our path as we follow his Son.